Today we're going to start a new unit on watercolors. So get your materials and let's paint. So go ahead and open up your sketchbook and turn your sketchbook so that it is landscape. Now, your watercolors are really cool. There's actually 4 different palettes of watercolors, and the lid can be used as a mixing tray, or today we are going to use it as a tracer. So put the watercolors aside for a moment, and let's start by creating the bones of a color wheel. By taking a few minutes to create a color wheel, we see how watercolor colors relate to each other, and we also start to get a feel for the materials, the paints, and the brush, and how they're going to react when we're using them for a project. So we can use the lid as a tracer. Along the left half of your paper is going to be used for your color wheel. We'll use the right half to explore the other colors in our watercolor palettes that are not part of the color wheel, so that we know what all of the colors will look like. So put your tracer so that it is in the left half and position it so that your spine has an open section going up and an open section going down, and then one of these spines going straight out to the left and straight out to the right. Now with your pencil, I'm using my B pencil, but it doesn't actually really matter, so whatever you have is fine. We're going to kind of see where this spine is starting in the center and then working its way out to the edge of our circle, and we're going to continue out from our circle the same distance and then put a dot. We're going to do the same for all of these spines. So this one, where it starts, and then as it ends at the edge of our lid, we're going to draw a line that comes out about the same distance and make a dot. We're going to do that for each of these without moving the lid, because so starting at this spine, coming out about the same distance, from here coming out, I'm just about to the edge, and from here coming out, there's a dot. Okay, now if you want to, you can just draw a line from dot to dot. If you have a straight edge, then you can use it to make your lines straight. It really doesn't matter. This is just to give us some areas to paint in. You can do it either freehand or you can do it with a straight edge. Okay. Now the next part, I'm going to use the straight edge, and you're going to make a straight line from opposite dots so that you create sections. You will end up having 6 sections. The reason you do is because your lid had 6 sections. So it should be something like that. Like I said, it's okay if it's not perfect. The reason that we're doing 6 sections is because we're going to have 3 primaries and 3 secondary colors. So up at the top, let's go ahead and write watercolor wheel. And we're going to go ahead and use our Sharpie. And again, either with freehanding or using your straight edge, we're going to trace over our pencil lines. I really love using ink and watercolor. It's just a really super nice combination. This is not a project, it's just so that you get familiar with the medium. So the purpose of a color wheel is so that you see the relationship of colors to each other. So we're going to set ours up like a traditional color wheel, and if you don't know what that looks like, you can look at the top poster at the front of the room. There's a great image of a color wheel on it. We're going to start by putting our yellow at the top. So please label yellow. We will put red in the bottom right section and blue in the bottom left section. These are our primary colors. So let's go ahead and write primary. Now, if we were to mix yellow and red, we would get an orange, and that's a secondary color. So let's give ourselves a label. And if we were to mix yellow and blue, we would get secondary green. Lastly, if we were to mix primary blue and primary red, we would get secondary purple. It's also called violet. And it's a secondary color. Now, one more thing to keep in mind. The word color equals the word hue. It's the same thing. Artists will often refer to a hue. It's the same thing as talking about the color, but the hue is generally pure. So when we're talking about red and blue and yellow, it's pure red, pure blue, pure yellow. When we talk about a tint, is a hue that is lighter. With acrylics, we would say hue or color plus white. But with watercolor, the paper is already white. So instead of actually adding white, we are going to add more water. I'll show you. The reason this is important is because the center is going to be the lightest hue. And our colors against the edge are going to be the darkest hue. And the way that we're going to achieve that is by adding more or less water. Okay, let's get started. Okay, I'm going to put the water there. Okay, so these are the 4 colors groupings that we have. And the yellow that is closest to primary is the yellow that is in with the green cakes. So that is going to be our primary yellow. The red, see how there's some reds, they're here along with the oranges. The red that is closest to our primary red is this red here that's with the black, white, and brown cakes. So that is the red that we're going to use. And then the blue that is closest to our primary blue, there's 3 that are grouped together, and the cake that is in the middle, that is the one that is blue primary, closest to that. So for right now, we're going to put this with the oranges and the browns. We're going to put this group of colors aside. Okay, let's start with the yellow. I always like to start with the lightest color because it's not going to just color my water very quickly. My brush is going to stay nice and clean longer, and it's just kind of easy. But in order to paint easily with my yellow, I'm going to rotate my paper upside down. So go ahead and rotate your paper upside down to match mine, because one of the things I'm going to do is, so I'm going to use the point of my brush toward the point, which is the center point of my color wheel. So this is my yellow section. Now, the neat thing about watercolor is it is semi-transparent, which means that you're going to be able to see the white of the paper underneath it. And yellow is a very, very light color, so even more so than the others, it's going to be able to see through the paint to the paper underneath. So you're going to get some water on your brush and maybe just a little bit of yellow. But I'm going to start in the center, and my goal is to have the center be very, very light, more water than paint. And then as I come out to the edge, I'm going to have more paint than water. That's my goal. So I just dabbed a tiny bit, and I'm actually staying away from this line a little bit. I'm pulling out from the center with my brush, picking up a little bit more water, and I'm actively picking up more paint, overlapping, picking up more paint, overlapping, bringing it down, picking up water, but now I really want to get some paint in there because I want the edge to be really yellow, strong yellow. My goal is to have a strong yellow edge here and then blend it back into the area that is lighter yellow. Now, the paper in your sketchbook is not watercolor paper, and it's also not mixed media paper. So you might get a little bit of warping. That's okay. All I want you to do is to get used to the colors, and the idea of adding more water means that you're going to have less vibrant colors, and in order to have more vibrant colors, you're going to have less water. Now I can rotate this around. Did a pretty good job of having more water in the center and more of my paint on the outside, so I have a more vibrant yellow on the outside. I'm using. So the red that I'm using is the one that's in the palette with the black and the white. Okay, so see, by doing yellow first, my water is pretty clean. So that's a nice trick. I'm going to rotate my paper so that I can easily use the angle of my brush. And again, I'm starting in the center. I'm just going to touch a little bit of the red paint onto my wet brush so that it's, oops, I don't even want it to be that much. I want it to be just like the tiniest bit. And then pick up more paint. Now, less water and more paint. Less water, more paint makes a stronger hue. Now I'm coming back with just pure water to try to blend that in just a little bit. And in watercolor paper, you can kind of move your paper around and some of that paint will kind of move around too. Watercolor paper has a different absorbency rate, and it's also denser and thicker so that the water doesn't make all of these little rumples. So that looks pretty good. We're going to rotate this around. And my primary blue is in the palette with the brown and the three blues. It's the blue that's in the middle. So just starting with the tiniest bit of paint on a wet brush, picking up more paint as I go, more, so I want to get it stronger and stronger. If I want stronger blue, then that means that I want less water. I'm even like using the brush because it's pointed like that to get the edges. Blending it in. It's nice to go over it again with just a wet brush and kind of blend it in. It helps. Okay, good job. Now we could mix yellow and blue to get green, or we could use one of the greens that we already have. Likewise, we could mix yellow and orange to make our secondary, or yellow and red to make our secondary orange, or we could use an orange that we already have, and the same with purple. So let's do that for all of our secondary colors. We're going to both mix, and we're going to compare it to the colors, the hues that are already pre-mixed for us. So we're going to take our secondary purple, secondary green, and secondary orange areas and divide each of those in half. The part, this little triangle part that's closest to the center, we are actually going to mix those colors. So again, I'm going to start with my orange. So I'm going to rotate around so it's easier for me to get to that area. And by mixing the primary yellow and primary red, we should get an orange. Now you can mix on your paper or you can mix directly from your palette. I'm going to be mixing kind of directly from my palette. So I have the red that I used and the yellow that I used. I'm going to start with the yellow and then pick up a little bit of red and see how that goes. Red is strong, which means that I'm not going to need as much red as yellow. So that's not a bad orange. Now let's compare it to the orange that is pre-mixed for us. Go ahead and pick up some water, pick up some orange. Interesting. This is definitely a pure hue. You can tell that this was mixed. And depending on what you were painting, you might want to have this that has kind of a layered look to it, or you might want to have something that is stronger. It just depends. Let's do the same with our greens. So I'm rotating it around. Okay, so we're going to use the same yellow that we used for our primary yellow and the same blue that we used for our primary blue. Remember, the blue is much stronger than the yellow, so we don't need nearly as much. By the way, if your yellow has some red in it still, like mine, you're going to want to clean that off. You can just take a paper towel and just wipe it, and that extra color will come off. It's important, especially with these really light colors, to have them be really clean. If you pick up any little amount of color at all, then it'll mix in. So, water, yellow, and it's not going to take much blue at all, maybe a little bit more than that, in order to mix a green. Use that brush and the angle of that brush. Don't worry too much that there's this kind of overlap look. It's not the paints and it's not the brush and it's not you, it's the paper. I once had a teacher that said, in watercolor, if you're going to invest in one material, invest in good paper. So this is our mixed green with yellow and blue, and we're going to rotate around and using the green that is opposite our yellow, that's the one that's closest to secondary green. Let's pick up that green. And you can see it's very watered down right now, so I'm picking up more color. If you want it to be a stronger hue, then your proportion of paint needs to be more than water. So when we mix these two colors, we end up with a kind of an olive green. And this is more of a, what would be called like a hooker's green. Let's do the same thing with our purples. Now, purples are notoriously hard to mix. So I would not be surprised at all if our mixed purple is not very pretty. I can see that I still have some yellow in my blue. I don't want that, so I'm going to wipe it out. And I'm going to be using the same color that I used for my primary, which is the red that's right next to, or on the palette with white and black. And I'm mixing that red with the blue that I used for my primary, which is the blue that's in the center. Red and blue are kind of equally strong, but I'm going to start with the one that is lightest or brightest, and to me that's the red. So I'm going to pick up the red, excuse me, and a little bit of blue. Oops, you can tell, see how red this is? See how red this is? It's very burgundy. Means that I need a little bit more blue. So that's not very purpley, but it's a beautiful color. Oh my goodness, I think I swallowed a fly. If it's a little redder than it needs to be, we can add a little bit of the blue in there. And don't feel like you have to overwork it. When you get it so that it's close, just leave it and let it dry. If you work too hard on the paper, especially paper in your sketchbook, then it'll start to break the paper down, and it'll start to kind of, the wetness will start to make it kind of pill and be kind of a mess. Now there is a purple blue in our color palette. It's the one that's on the color palette with the white and the black, and it's right next to the red and on the other side of the black. That is supposed to be purple. So if we add that in, I don't know what you think, but to me, that does not look purple. It's the one color that isn't very convincing in this little group of paints. To me, that looks like an ultramarine blue. Awesome job, guys. So this is a color wheel using our watercolors. What I'd like for you to do is, for all of the colors, go ahead and wet your brush, pick up some of the color, and then just give yourself a little line of that color. Go on to the next one. Give yourself a little line of the color. And keep rotating around until you've done the same for all 4 of your palettes. This will give you an opportunity to see in your sketchbook how these 3 blues are different, for instance, or how those 3 reds are different. These 2 blues are pretty similar. If you go in order, then it'll be easy for you to look back and take a look at these colors and help yourself decide which ones you like. Ooh, I love that canary yellow. Ooh, that is a bright green. If at any point you think that it would be helpful to dump your water and get cleaner water, that's perfectly fine. Interesting. This green definitely has more yellow in it, and then this is a little less yellow, and then this is bluer, and this is the bluest of the four greens. Can you see that? It's kind of ironic because the bluer green is right next to the yellow. But what do you do? Ooh, I like that. Kind of a yellow ochre. Ooh, that's like a burnt sienna. It's a nice rusty red. That's a nice pure orange. Okay, we've got one more to go. The only color that is not going to be semi-transparent is going to be this white. I rarely use white. Occasionally I can mix it in with a color in order to give it more opacity, a little thickness. But it's actually, that color is not really the white, it's more the mud color that's still on my water. Oof, that is a pretty red fire engine. This is our purple, but not a purple purple. Look at that. Great job. Now, before we clean up, one thing that I'd like for you to do is to take a paper towel and just make sure that your paints are relatively dry. Also, if you have any paints that are dirty from another color, say for instance maybe you mixed your orange and your yellow, and so your yellow has orange on it, by cleaning it off now when it's wet, it's gonna stay clean and be ready for you the next time that you paint and be so much better. By taking care of the extra water that's on top before you stack these, it'll just help them store better. If they're wet at all and you stack them and you put the lid on and then you slide it into your bin and they go sideways, then that wet water is just going to drip and contaminate all of the colors. Another couple of things that I would like for you to mark, if it's dry enough to do so, is that this is a mixed color. This is a mixed color. And this is a mixed color. That's going to help you remember that you mixed two colors in order to make that orange. And then this over here is our color chart. So I would go ahead and mark this one is primary red, and primary blue is this one. Which is the blue that's between the two blue in the group of three. And then the yellow, I think this is the one that we used. So this one is the one that's closest to primary yellow. Okay, that's it.